there's a quote that says, if your intention is good, then the place that you go will be good and the path you traverse will be good. If your intention is bad, then the place that you are and the path that you traverse will be bad. And since everything depends upon this intention, you should make efforts to strive in generating a wholesome intention. And so, at all times, and any and all times, we need to be in a good situation and we need a good path to traverse. Therefore, in order to bring that about, we should maintain proper intention and attitude. So particularly in the context of what we're doing here, yesterday I was talking about what we sometimes in Buddhist terms call Hinayana, or the fundamental teachings of the Buddha, or these days the lineages that still exist are called Theravada. But anyway, we were talking about that approach to Buddhism, and today we're going to move into, and that's what we call the common approach, meaning that it's shared amongst all schools of Buddhism. And today we're going to move into a level of discussion which we would call an uncommon, or a particular feature of Mahayana Buddhism. Yeah. And so because we're moving into that, then there is also a special or particular type of wholesome attitude we should develop in terms of our working with these teachings. And so that wholesome attitude, as described by Mahayana Buddhism, is what we call bodhicitta, or the mind of enlightenment. So when we say enlightenment, what we're talking about is a resultant state that we are aspiring towards. And that is, amongst all kind of results that you could attain through a spiritual path, what we consider to be the ultimate or the highest level of attainment, what we call the state of Buddhahood. And so that is a mind which is directed at that. And when I say a mind of enlightenment, or a mind directed towards enlightenment, it means the mind or the attitude which wishes to bring or to place all sentient beings into that place, into that state of enlightenment, or that state of Buddhahood. And so to explain that even more clearly or even more extensively, then we are focusing that attitude on all sentient beings who are experiencing suffering and wishing for them to be free of that suffering and brought to a state which is what we call the state of stable bliss or stable peace, meaning it's an unchanging state that you would not fall back into suffering, and that is the state of Buddhahood. So that is the bigger explanation, you could say, of bodhicitta. And if you talk about the way that this is put into practice in the tradition, then one who wants to engage in these teachings would first take what is called the Bodhisattva vow, which is a commitment towards this attitude that I just described. So whether you are taking that with or in the presence of a teacher or a lama, or you can also take the Bodhisattva vow just in front of a representation of the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, like a precious statue or something like that. And so you would then make this commitment. It's like a pledge that you make to free all beings from suffering and bring them to the state of enlightenment. And so in the traditional explanation of the historical account of the Buddha of our era, of Shakyamuni Buddha, is that in a previous lifetime, he generated bodhicitta and took the Bodhisattva vow before another Buddha named Mahamuni. And having taken that pledge and continued his path of practice and work over the course of many lifetimes, then in the lifetime in our world, then he attained complete Buddhahood and spread all of these teachings. And so starting with Shakyamuni Buddha and going all the way up until now, there have been a great number of accomplished masters in India. Like we talk about the 6 ornaments and the 2 supreme ones. These are just lists of different famous Indian Buddhist masters. And then onward into Tibet, we have like another kind of list of like the 3 Manjushris of Tibet and so forth. Anyway, there's been an unceasing stream of masters gaining attainment, gaining accomplishment through these practices. So it's like they've blazed, you could say, a great highway, if you wanted to speak in American terms, like a great highway of realization. For me, it was in 1985 that I went to Bodh Gaya in India. It's the place where the Buddha attained enlightenment, and His Holiness Dalai Lama was giving a transmission, like a reading transmission and brief instructions on Shantideva's way of the Bodhisattva. And it was that time, that was the first time that I received the Bodhisattva vow. And so from that time onward, I continued to receive the Bodhisattva vow again and again and again from numerous different teachers, from Drupal Penna Rinpoche, from Yangtang Rinpoche, from Gochen Tukulsang Rinpoche. Received those vows and retook them again and again and again. And so Shakyamuni Buddha, he had a firm resolve, a firm commitment, had a lot of diligence and discipline. And maybe we don't have it to that level. Maybe I don't have it to that level. But anyway, I'm going down that same highway. I'm following in his footsteps. That is how one would begin into the practices of the Mahayana, from making this commitment, this pledge of the Bodhisattva vow, and then just continuing on, maintaining that kind of integrity of that commitment. And so the way that that's put into practice in our tradition, which is the Nyingma tradition, is that normally one would engage directly in that practice through the Ngöndro, or the preliminary practices. So within the preliminary practices, the first 2 main practices are taking refuge and generating bodhicitta. And then the way that we put this into practice is by kind of trying to remind ourselves, or to maintain an awareness of that commitment in all of our daily activities, from the time we've taken that pledge through all of our daily activities, whether we're eating, laying down, resting, talking, whatever we're doing. So some of you may have a doubt, okay, so how am I supposed to do that? I still have to work in the world. I still have to make money. I still have to take care of my family. How can I work with these kind of ideas? And so that's, just whatever you're doing, whether it's in terms of your work or taking care of your family, your kids, whatever it is, you apply that attitude to the situation at hand, to the people right in front of you that wish for their freedom, their wish for their enlightenment, and so forth. Whether that is with your partner, your husband, your wife, whatever the case may be, your children, your coworkers, that, just like you want goodness and benefit in your life, so do they. And so to just apply that attitude, and it's not as if you have to change what you're doing, it's just changing a little bit of the context of how you think about what you're doing. So ordinarily, we're not able to think that way. We just think that making money is just for me. We don't think that it's also, that could be an aspect of could be actually influenced or done within this attitude of wishing for freeing beings and so forth. But, here what we're talking about is not stopping doing what you're doing and doing something else, but shifting your attitude about how you approach the things that you already do. And so if you continue in that way, like that quote I mentioned at the beginning, where I said that if your intention is good, then the place that you'll be is good, the situation you're in will be good, and the path you traverse will be good. And so if you keep that attitude in all activities, then everything's going to be beneficial for yourself and for others. So in Tibet, we have a lot of vultures, and we use vultures as an example sometimes. So when a vulture is flying, all they have to do is just slightly move the tip of their wing to steer different directions. They don't have to completely shift their whole body to turn. So it's just a little bit of a shift, or a play in the movement of the wing. It's for us, to take that example, it's all we're doing is making a slight shift in the direction of our intention, but we'll keep moving forward, we'll keep flying. All of that is to say that I encourage you from this point on to listen to these teachings with that intention of bodhicitta, the mind of enlightenment. And so we're here to talk about, again, mind and the nature of mind. And amongst all kind of states of mind that one could develop, I have said this many times, and many of you have maybe heard me say this, but the most precious mind we could develop, or that we could work with, is this mind of enlightenment, bodhicitta. So like I said yesterday, there are all kinds of states of mind. We have virtuous states of mind, non-virtuous, and neutral states of mind. And bodhicitta is also a state of mind. It is still like a subjective state of mind which has an object that it's thinking about. However, there is also a distinction to be made here, that there are two aspects, you could say, to bodhicitta. There is what we call conventional bodhicitta and ultimate bodhicitta. And so if we start the explanation from this perspective, I think the whole rest of the explanation, which is all connected to this idea of Mahayana Buddhism and this idea of bodhicitta, will become more clear. And so if you're someone who wants to work in this direction, who wants to think in this, what we might call a wholesome direction, then in the beginning, we're still working with a level of mind where there is a state of mind which is subjective, thinking about an object which is sentient beings. So we're thinking of all other beings and wishing for their ultimate level of happiness. And could be that we're moving forward with taking a vow and we make a commitment to that. And even if we're not there, we're shifting our mind, our intention in that direction. And so we're starting from a conventional perspective, this attitude which still has a subject and an object. So there is a bodhisattva, someone who's generating this intention of bodhicitta, and some beings that they wish to benefit. And so that's the attitude of conventional bodhicitta. And then an additional aspect to this conventional bodhicitta is that when you have that intention, then there are certain things that you're going to actually do which accord with that intention. So that is what we call the engaged bodhicitta, which is any kind of beneficial actions that we might do in the direction of that intention. So we often talk about that in terms of the 6 perfections of generosity, ethical discipline, patience, diligence, meditative concentration, and wisdom. But anyway, it doesn't matter the degree to which, whether it's a very vast type of activity for helping others or even just some very small intention to help others, all of that is still considered. If there is still a person who is practicing and an object who they think that they're working for or benefiting for, there's still a me and a you, or a subject and an object, all of that is considered conventional bodhicitta. And when we talk about these kind of actions for benefiting others, for example, I mentioned the practice of generosity. You don't perfect the practice of generosity by giving away everything you have and then having nothing anymore and being completely empty-handed. That's not exactly what we're talking about. We're talking more about perfecting an aspect in your mind, a mental quality of being able to give. So right now, we're not able to. The power of our compassion doesn't let us. The power of our greediness holds on too tightly. The power of our biases and jealousies and so forth are restricting our ability to want to help or to actually do something helpful. And so what we're talking about here when we talk about the so-called like perfection of generosity is perfecting the power of your mind and making your mind pure of these factors that would contribute to or which would restrict your capacity. All of those more kind of negative aspects that I mentioned, like covetousness, jealousy, and so forth. And so we're talking about a very completely pure attitude, like a pure golden attitude, and which is not contaminated by doing these activities merely for the sake of your own benefit or merely for the sake of gaining some kind of fame or that people would respect you more or that you would gain some kind of influence or power, but with a pure attitude of compassion. So just like a mother would act for her own child. And so that kind of pure attitude is what we're striving towards. Buddhist conventions will often say without expectation of a reward or a karmic payback, you could say. And so what that means is like, if I give, I should be free from any hope or expectation that someone's going to do something good back to me. Like if I give something to you that you're going to repay my kindness without any expectation of that is how we should give. And when we say without expectation of a karmic reward, that means that, some people might practice thinking that if I do a lot of good things in this life, that I'll get a fortunate outcome in my future life because of that. So we should be practicing, it's said in the teachings, without an expectation for a direct reward in this life or karmically that will gain some kind of good situation in the future. And so I'm not going to go into an extensive explanation of these qualities of the six perfections. But if we were to talk about just generosity, for example, like through the power of your compassion, that you gain a capacity to give whatever's needed, and your compassion is really blazing like the sun, then in that state of mind, then any of your grasping attachment and fixation disappears. And it's overpowered by the power of compassion. And so when we talk about ethical discipline as well, we're talking about perfecting that. It becomes naturally a part of you that you refrain from harming others, and that becomes naturally part of you that you are working for the welfare of others. So within ethical discipline, there are two aspects of that, or there are multiple aspects to that, one of which is more about avoiding harmful actions, and the other which is about actually engaging in helpful things. And so when that is kind of perfected, you could say, when we have the perfection of ethical discipline, then that kind of becomes a natural part of us. We're naturally going to refrain from doing anything that would harm others, and naturally going to keep on engaging in the things that will benefit others. And then with patience or forbearance, then the kind of essence of that, if it were perfected, is a mind that is undisturbed. And so if one has a good practice of patient forbearance, then small circumstances aren't going to be able to get you stirred up. They're not going to be able to get you angry or disturbed. And in the place of that anger or disturbance, then there will be an arising of compassion. And in that state, if one has that practice and has that state of compassion, then anger will not continue to abide in that state of mind if there is a presence of compassion. And then when we talk about diligence here, we're mainly talking about enthusiasm, some kind of joyful endeavor. And so if a bodhisattva becomes enthusiastic about helping others, enthusiastic about all the aspects of their practice, about meditating and so forth, then that enthusiasm will naturally cause laziness to dissipate. And so laziness is similar to what I was talking about when I was talking about neutral states of mind. Those are kind of an aspect of laziness. And so if one has this enthusiasm, then naturally that will dissipate. And so to summarize what happens through practicing these aspects of the six perfections is that, since we can say that these practices of the six perfections, they will ultimately be beneficial to ourselves and others, then these are virtues. And so this is going to increase the power of virtue. And with the increase of each of these, I told you that there is a corresponding kind of negative attitude or harmful attitude that declines. So like with generosity, your greed and so forth decline. With diligence, your laziness and so forth decline. So those are considered non-virtues. So through the practice of the six perfections, corresponding with the increase in the power of virtue, then those overwhelm or suppress, you could say, the power of non-virtue. And then the final two perfections are that of meditative concentration and wisdom, or sometimes we translate this as sublime intelligence. So basically, meditative concentration encompasses the two practices of shamatha and vipassana, or those are also translated as calm abiding and profound insight. And so through practicing shamatha and vipassana, or calm abiding and profound insight, you will gain this sublime intelligence, or this wisdom, which can discern very clearly each and every phenomenon. It knows precisely what everything is in its nature. And so that's the final perfection, the perfection of wisdom as it's most often translated. And so many of you, most of our students through Namchak who are involved in our programs are practicing calm abiding and profound insight, shamatha and vipassana. And so for those of you who are doing that, who are in those programs, then you've heard some teachings from me, you've learned some, then you stopped and you contemplated them for yourselves, then you put them into practice. And as you continue practicing, then the situation, like reality as it is, becomes more and more and more clear to you. So that's what I was talking about, that you're doing the meditation, so that's the cause, and you gain the effect, which is that wisdom. So that is an ever more clear knowledge or wisdom or intelligence which can discern what is reality. So what is it that's becoming more clear? It is that ultimate reality, ultimate truth. So that's something that we didn't know before, something that we were ignorant of or that we were unaware of, that we're now becoming more and more increasingly aware of. And as that becomes more and more clear, as we become more and more aware of that, then the delusions or mistakes of mind become lesser and lesser, less and less powerful, you could say. And so in the way of the Bodhisattva, Shantideva says, the antidote to the darkness of ignorance is emptiness. So those who wish to illuminate this, who wish to attain enlightenment, they should meditate on or become more aware of this reality of emptiness. So what we should understand, what I want you to take away from this, is that in this world of Mahayana Buddhism, that someone who is practicing as a bodhisattva, that they first generate this attitude of bodhicitta, and take that commitment to bodhicitta and gradually move through the practices and development of the practices of the six perfections. And as they're doing that, this is increasing the power of their virtue, diminishing the power of non-virtue, and they continue working in accordance with the commitment that they've made. And so just thinking back, mind itself, essentially, if I want to say what my mind is or what is in my mind, you could see that just by seeing what is it that you perceive, what is it that you experience. So like in my mind, there is still attachment, there is still anger, there is still stupidity, there is still jealousy, there is still pride. And on a more virtuous side, there is still generosity. There is still restraint from negativity and so forth. So there are also these virtuous things. And I think this isn't something that that I don't really have to tell you about. It's something that we all see inside ourselves. It's our own lived experience. And so amongst those states of mind, what I've been describing to you is a process by which the more wholesome qualities of mind or wholesome states of mind are enriched, the unwholesome or non-virtuous aspects become subsumed or kind of dormant or suppressed by the power of those virtues. And as a result of such a process or such a series of practices, then that will be helpful for both others and for ourselves, won't it? And so all of those things that we're doing which are beneficial are included in this path to which we have committed. And all of that can be what's called the conduct or the behavior of a bodhisattva. And if I gave that a name, according to Dharma lingo, Dharma jargon, all of that is considered an aspect of conventional bodhicitta. And so this encompasses like the states of mind and things you do in the states of mind that are connected to this commitment or pledge of bodhicitta, and which are actions which are driven by this attitude of bodhicitta, in which there is still a me who is developing this attitude and working with that attitude for the benefit of some other, that there is a subject and an object still involved. So everything we've been talking about up to now is something that we could say involves the conventional aspects or the conventional nature of our mind, the way that our mind functions on a conventional level. And so when we're talking about that conventional aspect or conventional nature of mind, we have objects, and those objects kind of appear in our mind, or the form of those objects appears in our mind. And we have sometimes what we call conventional truth. And so conventional truth is when there is a conventionally, you could say, undiluted or unmistaken state of mind, seeing an object which isn't clearly seen. When you see that, we would say that is an experience of so-called conventional reality or conventional truth. So you're looking at me and you see me. And so from that conventional experience or that conventional perspective, when you see me, your eyes are perceiving my shapes and colors that perceive the visual field. You're perceiving that accurately. And so from that perspective, we would call that a conventional valid cognition. And you're seeing me in an unmistaken way, and what I am is a direct experience of that. So from that perspective, that is called conventionally true or conventional valid cognition. However, what is it that the eyes actually see? They only see a very coarse or obvious level of perception. They cannot see the subtle reality. And so all of our sense faculties, our sense consciousnesses, can only perceive something very coarse, meaning that something which is like amalgamated. Like we don't see the subtle things that create that amalgamation. For example, you can only see this coarse kind of like block of shapes and colors that makes up me, and our eyes can't even perceive even something more subtle than that. And so from the perspective from which your eyes or your a sense perception is seeing, let's just say with the eyes, are seeing in a way that you are seeing this coarse, like obvious form. And so the object is not mistaken, your vision is not mistaken. That is called conventional truth. And so if we were just having a normal conversation and I were to tell you, oh no, you don't see me and your vision is false because you don't see my true subtle reality, that's like crazy talk, you know? Like what you see is what you see, and that's what appears in your mind. And to say you didn't see it because you didn't see some more subtle reality would be crazy. So from that perspective, we say that you have that is conventionally true. So there's an old guy in Nepal, and we asked him one time, like, how are you doing these days? And he said, well, my ears don't see so good these days, but otherwise I'm pretty good. Anyway, Khen Rinpoche was just joking. You don't see with your ears anyway. I think he was just mistaken in the way he was talking. But so anyway, the point that I'm coming to, aside from that story, is just that like whatever you see, if you're seeing it accurately, then from that perspective, that is what we would call conventionally true, and we would call that a valid cognition. And so, did you get it? That's what we would call the conventional nature of mind or conventional function of mind. And so to talk in more specific Dharma terminology, in the book that's called The Entry to the Middle Way from Chandrakirti, he says that whatever appears to your unafflicted six main consciousnesses, you could say, is considered conventionally true. And then he says, well, from whose perspective would we say that it is true? And he would say from ordinary worldly people. And his point is that it's not helpful, and it's actually a mistake, to tell worldly people that what they see isn't real. Because for them it's real, and from that perspective it's true. That's exactly what I was trying to explain before, is that like, now I'm just adding this other layer of Dharma lingo to it, like the way that it would be talked about in a text. Unaffected or unafflicted six sense consciousnesses, right? So what does that word unafflicted or unaffected mean? It means that there could be something in the thing that you're perceiving that causes you to see it wrong, or there could be something in your experience of your like eyes or your consciousness or something that is causing you to see it wrong. So like, for example, when you're driving along in a car or a passenger in a train or something like that, because of the movement and the object you're seeing is this motion, it can feel like that you're not moving, but that the objects are moving, that like the landscape is moving. And that's what we would call a cause for delusion in the object you're perceiving. And so because there is something which is afflicting or affecting your consciousness, which means that there is a cause for delusion in the object you're seeing, which is causing you to be deluded, then that perception of the mountains moving or the landscape moving is not conventionally true. That's not real. And so, for example, let's say this cup is completely pure, completely clean. There's something in my actual sense consciousness or in my eye that's causing me to think that there's a hair in this cup, and I keep trying to rub it off, but it's not actually there. That's a cause for delusion that's within my consciousness or within my senses. That's what I said when unafflicted or unaffected consciousness means without a cause for delusion in the object, as in the moving landscape, or a cause for delusion in my own senses or my own consciousness. So if it doesn't have that affliction, then it's conventionally true. And so when we say that, another thing that we're saying is that in whose perspective is this considered true? Or like from another perspective, how can we say this is true? Is that it's whatever worldly people take to be true, generally speaking. So like when we say worldly, we mean someone whose mind is not affected by some philosophical ideas about reality, or someone who's not already engaging in these practices of calm abiding and profound insight, or shamatha and vipassana. So like just what ordinary people in their ordinary conversations talk about, they're talking about it on the level of conventional truth. And so to summarize, it is conventional truth is something that happens or some situation where there is no cause for delusion in the object being perceived or in the mind that's perceiving it. Like there's no fault in your senses, for example. And also like an experience, you could say, which is not affected by your religious underpinnings or something like that. Khen Rinpoche said, whoever gets involved in any kind of philosophy or religion becomes brainwashed by that, and they start to see things through the lens of that tradition. And so what we're talking about is an unafflicted, bare perception or bare experience of reality, you could say, or of conventional reality. So that's what is conventional truth. So we're talking, this is also, just to reframe this, Khen Rinpoche said something before that I forgot to translate, but this is a perspective from called the Madhyamaka or middle way philosophy and there's a technical subdivision of that for those of you that have studied some of these texts, of Prasangika or the consequentialist school of middle way philosophy. So like Nagarjuna, Chandrakirti are some of the famous kind of teachers from that tradition. So Khen Rinpoche told me, Justin, to kind of just sum up what he just said. So basically, on one level, conventional truth is the ordinary level on which ordinary people talk. Whatever they kind of think is real is conventional truth. But on another level, what is conventional truth is the things that are perceived and your perception of them. If your sense consciousness or your senses or your mental consciousness, the 6 ways of perceiving, are in themselves unafflicted, as well as the thing they are perceiving is not causing some afflicted delusion, like as in the case of the moving landscape and so forth. All of that is considered conventional truth or conventionally true, conventionally real, something like that. So what I'm trying to get you to understand right now is that from the perspective of Mahayana Buddhism, and particularly this tradition that I just explained, is what you could consider kind of the highest level of Mahayana Buddhist perspective on what conventional truth is. And so I'm trying to give you what they would say conventional truth is and what the conventionally true level of mind is, or what conventional truth in terms of mind is. And so for me, I feel like that's the way it is. Like there's no other way we could present a conventional truth. But if you see some other way, let me know. Let's talk about it. Okay, so let's take some questions about that if you have some, and Rachel, can we focus the questions right now just on this topic? Because Khen Rinpoche said for now, I'm coming to a conclusion on one topic and I want to sum that up before we move to the next thing.
Conventionally, we say in the world, or the sun rising in the east is beautiful. When examined carefully, however, investigating and thinking carefully, we discover in fact the earth and our position on its surface are turning toward the sun and never rises or sets in the west.
So yes, that's true. And regardless of how we perceive that, whether it is as a rising and setting or the turning of the earth or whatever, the point in such expressions is that there is somewhere or some situation upon which the sun starts to shine and some situation upon which it sets. And also, from what I know of science and what I've heard of science, it's not as if the sun's just sitting still and we're spinning, but the sun is also moving, right? The sun and stars are also themselves moving. So there's a complex relationship there. So like, for example, like back in the old days, when such expressions came about, like the sun is rising or setting or whatever, the situation of the earth spinning and that was a different situation according to modern science was beyond the mental landscape of anyone. No one had ever perceived of that. No one could ever conceive of that. And if at that time a Dharma teacher had even known the actual science of what was happening, it's not actually helpful to argue with people about those kinds of things. So there's also, that perspective that it doesn't really matter. So back in ancient India, even everyone believed that the world was flat and that around the earth there was an iron wall surrounding. And so back then, were someone like the Buddha, even if they knew such things like the modern scientific understanding of what was going on, even if they knew that, no one would believe them. No one's going to want to hear that because everyone thinks it's that way. And actually arguing with them isn't going to serve the purpose that spiritual teacher has. So the primary message of the Buddha, the primary intention of the Buddha is to help people overcome their temporary and ultimate kind of dissatisfaction or suffering. So, now that we've had such modern scientific and material improvements in science and so forth, then we know more about that, the situation of our environment and the world and so forth. So, but anyway, just about conventional truth in general, like what we've been talking about, is there any particular questions or doubts about that? So that all of what I've just been talking about in this session is kind of a summary of what is mind, what is the nature of mind conventionally, and then even as a subset of conventional mind, what is conventional bodhicitta, because that is a state of mind, which is still on the conventional level. And so if we were then to think, okay, well, is that all there is to it? Or is there something more subtle that we could analyze or deeper that we could go in this conversation? Then I would say, yes, there is. So there is still a reality that we call ultimate truth or ultimate reality that we could discuss. And so to begin that discussion, we have to start by saying that ultimate reality is not perceivable by our ordinary consciousnesses that can only see coarse phenomena, like I said before, like things that are amalgamations of other things, coarse, obvious level of phenomena. So where we're going with this is that first I was saying that there is a reality which is more subtle than our ordinary coarse experience of reality, and that there is also some other kind of perceiving consciousness, you could say, or perceiving state that would need to recognize that is something also different than or more subtle than our ordinary level of mind. So now I think first what I want to talk about is the mind or the awareness, you could say, that might realize the ultimate reality. And so I talked about before with conventional mind that there's always a subject and an object, right? And so then when we talk about ultimate reality, is there a level of mind or a kind of mind that can realize that? Because I already told you that that can't be perceived by your ordinary sense faculties, right? You can't see that with your eyes or hear it with your ears and so forth. So what is it, or how is it that that ultimate reality could be perceived? And so we need to talk about that in two ways. And so first is to realize or come to understand ultimate reality through concept or directly. So there's two ways to talk about realizing ultimate reality. So conceptually or directly. And so when I say conventionally, I'm using a Dharma term, a technical term that we call a meaning generality. It means that something's appearing in your mind. When I say something about emptiness or ultimate reality, something appears in your mind, something that is your approximation, your mental image, what appears in your mind when you hear those words. And so on the basis of whatever you're understanding, like whatever kind of approximation of ultimate reality is appearing in your mind, we're discussing ultimate reality on the basis of that. So that's called a conceptual kind of approximation of reality, something like that. So like, for example, we have a bunch of students from some of our Asian Dharma centers coming to America right now. Some of them are here with us in Montana at the Buddha Garden. And I asked them, so, they had never been to America before. And so I said, is America what you thought it was before? Like when you get here, is it similar to what you imagined it to be? And they're like, no, not at all, completely different. And so the same thing happened to me when I first came to America. I hear about America and how famous America was from my perspective living back in Asia. And I think I'm just going to see like magnificent cities everywhere and just some incredible, like incomprehensible kind of situation. And I get here, and especially here in Montana, you come, there's a lot of empty space and there's livestock and cattle all over the place. It's really not what I imagined at all. So what I'm telling you here is that what I perceived of America before, what I thought of America before, was something that was just an approximation of what was appearing in my mind when I heard about America. And so that's that meaning generality. And so there was a difference between my intellectual or conceptual idea of what America might be and then my actual experience of what it was. And so similarly, there's a difference between our intellectual approximation of what reality might be. I had an idea of what America was, and then when people would explain to me about what America was, I was building upon a concept of what America was. And so similarly, there are two ways to approach reality. One is through our conceptual understanding of it, and we're building upon or developing a conceptual understanding, which is an appearance, something appearing in our mind. And then there is the actual direct experience of reality that happens when we use a word Arya beings, so beings who have, or noble beings who have had a direct experience of reality, then get the name noble beings. So there's a difference between their, you could say, direct experience of reality versus our conceptual experience of reality. And so now I'm going to start talking about this ultimate reality, which according to this middle way philosophy, which I talked about before, the perspective I'm talking about right now is the consequentialist school, or prasangika madhyamaka, for those of you that know that terminology. If not, it's what we consider in the middle turning of the wheel teachings, the highest level of philosophy. So anyway, right now I'm going to be talking about this, and it's going to be creating or kind of working with the general, like meaning generality, or that general conceptual image of what emptiness or what ultimate reality is for you. And so for those of you that already have some direct experience of emptiness through your practice, then what I'm talking about will kind of merge together with your experiential understanding of emptiness. And for those of you that have not gained some experience through practice, then it's just going to be building more of a concept of what emptiness might be. And so I'm going to be talking about this ultimate reality of emptiness. For some of you who are older students, meaning you've been with me in many teachings, you've maybe heard me talk about this quite a lot. And so all of these things, since take this whole conversation connected to mind, then all of these states of mind, starting with the mind of enlightenment, bodhicitta, all the way down to the afflictive states of mind of attachment, aversion, and ignorance, if you really look deeper into them in a more subtle level, they don't actually exist as something stable and solid as we normally experience them on a very coarse, obvious level. And so in our normal experience, we're experiencing things like very coarse states of mind, like attachment, aversion, ignorance, and so forth. And let's say we're angry, and we think that our anger is real, and because we're a real person that has real anger, with that anger we harm others. Or there are others who have anger, and that anger really exists, and because they have that anger, they are hurting me in some way. And so we're taking an assumption that anger really exists and that it has some control. And so we take that as our basis, and we're just holding on tightly to whatever that emotion is. And whether that emotion's going to drag us upwards or downwards, either way, we're assuming or taking a basic assumption that it's real. But when we really investigate the reality or the existence of such states of mind, it becomes very difficult to still continue to posit some kind of true existence. And so if we try and search out for that seemingly truly existing state of anger, for example. And, in our perception, what we're perceiving is that it's something that truly exists in and of itself. But when we seek out a state of anger that exists without relying upon other conditions, that is independent, that is existing in and of itself, that doesn't rely upon causes, conditions, or an object of that state of mind for its arising, then no matter where we look, no matter how we look, inside of us, outside of us, we never find such a thing. So there is a lot of Buddhist logic that can deeply penetrate into this current investigation right now, but I think going too much into that right now is going to be a little bit difficult to communicate, or difficult for all of you to get in such a short time. From the beginning, the most basic teachings that I presented at the beginning, the kind of foundational teachings or Theravada level teachings, we went in and we subdivided. We showed that mind isn't a singular thing, but that there are all kinds of classifications of mind, mental factors, different states of virtuous and non-virtuous minds, and so forth. And so when we look around and we try and find some truly existing state of anger, where is it? At what moment is it? Like, where is it in all of those classifications of mind? Where is that? When we look around, we try and find, is it our visual consciousness? Is it our hearing consciousness? Is it our nose consciousness? Is it our primary mental consciousness? We try and seek it out. It's really hard to find something that appears or that exists in the way that we think it does. So what normally happens is we don't investigate at all the nature of these things, and just something that feels like anger appears. We assume that it's real, and then we just act with that assumption. So for most people and in most traditions, they would want to say that if you were trying to seek out these states of mind, like anger, attachment, aversion, that you would say that it exists within your thinking mind, your mental consciousness, as opposed to your sense consciousness. When we say mental consciousness is the state of mind which could think of, or which could take anything that exists as its object. So like, for example, we all have an experience of this. We hear about things and then we think of them in our mind. We see something and then we think of it in our mind, that kind of thing. So if we turn our investigation or our intention in on that mental consciousness itself, all we see is a bunch of very swift momentary flashes of awareness. So from moment to moment, like microscopic moment to moment, is just flashing of arising and ceasing of states of mind. Other than that sequence of momentary states of consciousness, there is no actual solid, singular, stably, independently existing thing that you could call mind. So like my mental perceptions, of this table, of a chair, of experiences of joy or sorrow and so forth, there's no way you could say that those are one thing. Just from that simple example, we can automatically know that mental consciousness or mind itself is not a singular thing. And other than those individual awarenesses of things, there is no other thing that you could say is mental consciousness. So all there is in our mind is, some kind of awareness of things, and then some thinking about those things, and then awareness of other things and thinking about those things. And there's nothing more that you could posit as mind, nothing more solid or substantial than that. And so the past has already happened and is gone. The future has not yet happened, so it doesn't exist. And the present moment, as soon as you try and even posit a present moment, it's already ceased and moved on to the next moment. And so when we try and talk about the mind and we try and look at it in terms of an analysis of the three times, like the past has already ceased, the future hasn't come, the present is ceasing as soon as you even try and mention it, then there's no solidly existing mind that you could ever posit. So ultimately we say that mind is emptiness. Meaning that if you really analyze it, you don't find a truly existing mind that exists in the way that you normally assume that it does. When you don't analyze it, there is still interdependent circumstances that lead you to perceive all kinds of various things. But even though you're perceiving those things, those perceptions, that mind doesn't truly exist in any substantial way. And so that's where we come to the discussion where we say that ultimately mind is empty or emptiness. So I think it's good now for you guys, if you have some questions about this specific point, let's talk about that.
People who are mentally ill, so they have challenges with perceiving reality correctly. It's almost like, is there any hope for them as far as, it's a real struggle even once you understand. And like, I speak from a point of view of, I have bipolar disorder. So like sometimes things seem one way and sometimes they seem another. And it's something that, it's a struggle. And so it's like, it's nice to think that there's hope for that, but it does seem like a particular challenge. And does Buddhism, is there anything around that, as far as, see, that's the thing. My question is not really clear. It's just something that's been on my mind.
So yes, there is hope, and there is, the whole Buddhist world is kind of focused on developing a correct perception of reality. But you have to do that through practice, through meditation, and that meditation has to actually reach a certain level for it to actually have that effect. And so in order to gain that level of practice, then it's going to be different for everyone. Some people make the progress really fast, and for some people it takes a long time. And even for those who it takes a long time, they're going to keep slowly making progress. And it really is just a matter of how much kind of enthusiasm and diligence you can bring to it. It's not impossible to speed that up or not impossible to make that transformation. But for some people, it may take a very long time. And so in my understanding, the Buddhist kind of way of talking about what we might call mental illness and the Western kind of medical therapeutic way of talking about it are a little different. So in the Buddhist way of talking about this, we would say that any mental illness is something which is not inherent to the mind. It is something which is, you could say, like a temporary state of afflicted mind, but it's not the nature of your mind. It's not inherent to your mind. And so that's also true for everyone. Like everyone is normally experiencing a state which is a temporary state, which is not the actual true nature of their mind. And so, the way of talking about that illness, and it seems like in the West, often mental illness is talked about in the same way that physical illnesses are, that they are actually like something that is off in some kind of like part of your body or something that's off in your physical situation that can be remedied by physical means like medicines and so forth. And I have serious misgivings about that, serious doubts about that myself. I feel that there isn't some solid thing in your body that can just like get fixed and then that's going to completely change your perception. So in the Tibetan world of Tibetan medicine, there's often a discussion about what we translate often as subtle energy, but in the direct translation and like in terms of the elemental world, it's talked about as the wind element. And so, we talk about how that unsettled energy or wind element can stir up your mind. So like, for example, like when you're upset, if you just intentionally and mindfully breathe very slowly and gently, then your mind starts to gently slow down, doesn't it? It starts to chill out, calm down. And so that is because it was like a disturbance of the wind element that's even creating or as a part and parcel of the energy of that anger. So anyway, that's the Buddhist way of talking about that. And I think that it is not an impossible situation. It's definitely a hopeful situation.
I'm curious about developing over time through practice and reducing the number of times and the intensity of, say, anger or some of the other non-virtues. I had a situation arise recently. It surprised me. I mean, it shouldn't, but, we all still react, most of us that are on the path, but it did surprise me. And I'm just wondering, when I went in and sort of analyzed or looked at the situation, I found that it wasn't so much, there was anger there at the situation, but there was also, I thought, gosh, maybe there's an element of greed here, or maybe there's an element of some other non-virtue. So I'm wondering if you can talk about that. And it seems like, gosh, there is a lot of practice to be done. It is hard. It's frustrating trying to make progress. I feel like I am making progress. And then something like that can happen. And I think, oh, for heaven's sake, because I sort of caught myself, but I couldn't talk myself through. It wasn't that I was reacting, negatively or violently, but I was trying to take an action that would, I can give you the example. We have rodeo in town, and I have people parking on land on the land that is a building where I'm trying to instill Buddhist principles. Let's put it that way. In 50 years, they've used that land, and they park the trailers, and the horses are there, and they do their thing. And of course, rodeo in and of itself it's not really in alignment with Buddhist values, but they're, generally good people. So I've talked to them 2 years in a row, actually 3 years in a row now, to just come and talk to me about, we're coming, we're going to park here, etc. Nobody ever does that. And so I got frustrated this year, and I decided I would shut the power off, because they also want to use the power on the outside of the building. And, it's expensive. Power is expensive. So then I just went in a seat of, I could feel the intensity, and that intensity surprised me. But because I come from a whole family, just like, was it Katie that said she comes from a family of really intense, angry people?
So it's not as if like you're not making progress. It's not as if your practice isn't helping you, because if you weren't practicing, you wouldn't even be having this reflection right now. You wouldn't even be aware of your anger and wanting to do something about it. And even just by being able to reflect in that way, then that anger, the kind of continuity of that anger isn't going to remain in your mind. And so the main problem or the main situation that happens with anger and the way that it can harm us is if it remains for a long time. Like if it's just a matter of how long it appears in your mind. Some people, just some small situation can happen and they will hold that anger and it will mess up their whole life. So I would encourage you to not think about anger as something that you're going to be able to completely 100% eradicate. So there is some kind of energy in mind that is associated, you could say, with anger that like flashes up, and if you can see it right, it'll dissipate away. So there is that power I'm talking about. Sometimes we'll call it an intensity of mind. And in certain situations or in certain ways, that intensity is something that's very helpful for us. So I'm not talking specifically of anger right now. For example, like sometimes in order to help others or to accomplish certain things, we need a certain level of intensity in that attitude or that action. And so if you can approach it this way and keep working towards it in this way, what you're normally experiencing as anger will start to become more and more of compassion. And if you can do that, then even if anger comes up, it won't stay for a long period of time. And if it doesn't stay for a long period of time, if you can even stop it from driving you to a reaction where you say something out of anger or do something out of anger, then even better. But even if it does come up, even if you do say something in anger, if you don't hold that in mind, it's not going to create that kind of destruction that I described yesterday. Like normally when we talk about the function of anger, then it is something which is going to drive people away from you. It's going to create separation. And if you can catch the anger before it erupts into some kind of verbal or physical expression, then it's not going to even have a chance to affect anything. It's not going to create that negative situation. What will also be really helpful moving forward is once you have an experience of anger, once that continuity or that stream of anger has dissipated, to stop and think, where did the anger go? And just meditate like that for a moment.
Where did the anger go? Not where did it come from, but where
did it go?
Yeah.
So you can look both, like where did it come from, where did it go, either way. So still, through this discussion, we haven't really gotten to a point where I'm getting any understanding of whether you understood what I was talking about emptiness or not. So let me just follow up a little bit here then. When I say emptiness, what I mean is that no matter what you were to look at, if you tried to examine it deeply and try and find some supposedly kind of truly existing thing there, that you'll never find it. And that is what we say like that. We use this kind of terminology of calling it emptiness, that there's nothing that you could truly find upon examination. And then to bring this conversation around, there is a common expression that comes from the Heart Sutra, where we say that form is emptiness, emptiness is form is not other than emptiness is not other than form. And you can take that exact same formula, we call that the 4 applications of emptiness, you can apply that to mind. So you could say mind is emptiness is mind is not other than emptiness is not other than mind. And so from that, then one of our lineage teachers, Mipam Rinpoche, he says that you need to be aware, become aware of, or realize that things are essentially empty, and you need to understand that in a deep way, like from the depths of your being. What I'm trying to get across here is like, I want to communicate this clearly. If I just keep pushing forward without you asking something, without having some interaction, that it's just going to create confusion or give you a headache. But if you don't gain a somewhat clear understanding of this topic of emptiness, then it's going to be really hard to understand the topic of the third turning of the wheel, or the third section of the Buddhist teachings about Buddha nature. So think about emptiness in terms of your mind. Also think about emptiness in terms of your body. And so also try and think about, like last night when I talked about emptiness in general, and then today I'm talking about the emptiness of mind. Do you see any differences in that? So think about that.